Well, welcome to our next short reading and reflection to be listened to in conjunction with our communion service, this time for the 21st of October. I hope this finds you well. So, our reading from the Bible is from Luke chapter 12, verses 42 to the end. The Lord answered, that's Jesus, the Lord answered, "Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant when the master finds whom the master finds doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, 'My master is taking a long time in coming,' and then he begins to beat the other servants, both men and women, and to eat and to drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. The servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. For everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." So Jesus is doing his storytelling using parables to explain what his kingdom is like. A parable uses imagery and story to do that. It isn't a literal pictorial understanding from which we should take lots of doctrine from, but these parables certainly do get you thinking about what Jesus is thinking about. Now, Jesus' kingdom, as we have explored before, is to do with us living under his kingdom rule. So, with that as very brief background, we find the image of a housekeeper managing the household of a big landowner who's absent and who at some point will return to take stock of what's going on. This housekeeper has to make sure, or should be making sure, that those under him are fed at the appropriate time. You see, if the landowner should suddenly just turn up and find the housekeeper not doing what he should be doing, well, then there would rightly be trouble. And Jesus is using this imagery to explore something of the theme of his second coming, of judgment, and actually of mercy. Our belief is that death is not the end, yet we will be held to account for how we have lived our lives. And you pick up from the reading that the suddenness of the landowner's return can catch his servants out. Maybe we need to understand this as us not knowing simply when our time of being called account by God will be, but we can be ready for that. No one likes to think about God judging them because, frankly, that's all too embarrassing and actually quite frightening. Yet the point Jesus is making is that we will be called to account by God. An awesome prospect. Yet to be ready for that moment now, even within life, means that judgment actually won't be so harsh. Now, Jesus isn't here talking about hell, whatever that may mean for you. Rather, this is solely an issue of being called to account. Those who know little of Jesus' ways but do their best will receive few blows. Those who know more about Jesus' ways, well, being called to account has added depth to it. Being called to account doesn't sound so good, does it? But pause for a moment. This is being called to account. This is not us needing to give account for actions in life and then fearing the consequences of that because of Jesus' death on the cross, because of what happens there. There is mercy. Heaven is our eternal destination. Yet we will be called to account for how we have managed the Lord's affairs here on earth. And it strikes me that there are two further conclusions we can take from this? Firstly, the wise manager knew what he had to do, and we can draw from our reading of the Bible how we should manage God's affairs as best as we are able, how we should steward the world around us, how we should care for it, how we should manage it and care for those who live within it. We will be called to account for this. That is judgment, but that is not the same as the consequences of judgment. Again, Jesus has dealt with those consequences on the cross. Yet elsewhere, Jesus speaks about the consequences of eternal judgment. It's alluded to here, with those being placed with the unbelievers. This is simply a story about being called to account, and so to make good use of the responsibilities that God charges us with. But note that those who know little about God's affairs are let off more lightly in this calling to account. Even here, we glimpse of an image of God's mercy. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Yes, there is a greater calling to account for leaders. Yet there is also mercy. Simply let the message of this reading challenge you. Are you ready to be called to account, should that time come, sooner than perhaps you may think? Are you happy you know what your responsibilities towards God and others truly are? This is a sobering reading. Yet it is still tinged with mercy. That is God's nature. If you are not sure what your responsibilities towards God and His creation are, maybe now is the time to read more of God's story for yourself and to talk that through with others.